Today we will be looking at the general journal, errors affecting trial balance agreement. At the end of the lesson, we should be able to explain why suspense accounts may be made, its function, create a suspense account in order to balance the trial balance, correct errors using the suspense account, and finally, recalculate profits after the errors have been corrected. Now, errors affecting trial balance agreement. These errors mean that the total of the debit column in the trial balance will not be the same as the total of the credit column. You are very much aware that the trial balance has a list of balances as well as a debit column and a credit column. So what we're saying is that at the end of calculating both columns, we would find out that the debit column is not the same as the credit column. Correction of errors. So once we have found out that there are errors or it did not balance, we would have created a suspense account, which we will talk about shortly. But when we do find these errors after we have created the suspense account, we would have to correct them by using our double entry system or ledgers. For those entries, one entry must be made in that suspense account that was created, and the other entry must be made in the account where the error was made. Now let us keep this in mind. The double entry principle must be carried out. What I mean by that is that there must be a debit entry and a credit entry, and we ought to do our journal entries to show the correction. Let us look at the errors that would have caused our trial balance total not to agree. The first one is incorrect addition in any account. What do we mean by that? Maybe in the sales account, while you were adding up, you added up and caused it to be greater than it ought to be, so you overcast it. Or while adding up in the same sales account, you got a figure less than what it should have been, so it's undercast. So an incorrect addition was done in any account. Number two, making an entry on only one side of the account. For example, a debit entry and no credit entry, or a credit entry and no debit entry. So you sold goods to a debtor. Now there are two accounts we know that would have been our sales account and the debtor's account, but you only put information in the sales account and forgot to put the information in the debtor's account. So that would have created the trial balance not to agree. And the third and final type of error is when entering a different amount on the debit side from the amount entered on the credit side. So using back the same debtor and sales account, you may have entered 20 in the sales account and then entered 30 in the debtor's account. So there's a difference of 10 in those accounts. Now, with all this said, to make this correction, we will be using a special type of account to ensure that our trial balance agrees. And this is called the suspense account, the one that I mentioned earlier. But we're going to go into it some more. So the suspense account is just a temporary provisional account used to make the totals of the trial balance agree. So a business will open a suspense account when they find that the trial balance totals do not agree. So they will definitely use this account to temporarily ensure that the trial balance agrees. So let us look at it. The procedure where trial balance do not agree. So if you look at this account, you will recognize that after all of the accounts have been entered, the total is different. So the debit side is 100,000 and the credit side is 99,960. Therefore, it does not agree. So the accountant found that the total of the trial balance do not agree. The first thing that they're going to do is to make the trial balance total agree. Do you remember what I said was used to make it agree? I hope you do. So we're going to add an extra amount, in this case 40, because it's short, the credit side is short by 40 when compared to the debit side. So we're going to add 40 to the credit side. And look, ooh, suspense account. That's exactly what we were referring to earlier as a provisional account that is used to make sure that the debit and the credit side agree. So we're going to add 40 to the credit side as mentioned before, and this will allow for the trial balance to agree. Step 2. In step 2, we're going to actually open the suspense account in the general ledger to record this item. We must show what we did in the trial balance. So here's the account. So we have suspense account. We place the date. That would be the end of the period when the trial balance was created, and we added the $40 to make it balance. Let's make some notes. The entry in the suspense account is made on the same side as the entry in the trial balance. In this case, as you can see from the example before, we had put the $40 on the credit side. Like all the entries in the trial balance, the column used matches where the balance appears in the ledger account. So because it is on the credit side in the trial balance, it should be on the credit side in the suspense account. Number 2, once the suspense account is set up, it is necessary to check the amount to find any situation where the credit entry has not been matched by a debit entry. All right, so if we have a debit and there's no credit, we need to look for it. Number 3, as each of these errors is found, a correction is made in the ledger account containing the error, and matching entry is made in the suspense account. So once we find that error, or the account with the error, we are going to make an entry in that account as well as an entry in the suspense account, seeing that the suspense account was created because this error was made. And finally, when all in the double entry in our ledgers have been found, the suspense account should be closed, because at that point a revised trial balance would show the total agreeing. So we are going to look for those errors. Once we have found them and made the entry in the different ledgers, we are then going to close our suspense account because we no longer need it, and we will have a revised trial balance showing the total agreeing. All right, let us go through some examples. These examples are where there's only one error. So let's assume that the cause of the error of $40 is found on the 31st of March 2009. The error was that the sales account was undercast by $40. So the sales balance was short by $40. So this would be the suspense account at the end of 2008. We found the error in 2009. So at the end of 2008, we would have entered difference as per trial balance with our $40, but then we would have closed it off at the end of the year, and in 2009 we would have brought forward or brought down the $40. So this is what the account will look like after we have corrected our error. But first, let us look at the journal. Now that the sales account was undercast, we need to increase the sales account. And to increase it, we will definitely have to credit the sales account, seeing that it normally carries a credit balance. And once we have credited the sales account, we're definitely going to debit the suspense account because we must have a debit for each credit. And we will have the narrative sales undercast by $40. So in our suspense account, we have our balance brought down of $40 and the entry for the correction on the debit side, so it will balance it off. So that's why we have it double underlined. And then in the sales account, we know that we would have had additional information prior, but right now we're just showing where the correction of the error took place. So we're going to credit the sales account with the amount as stated in the journal. Example 2, the trial balance on December 31st, 2009 had a difference of $168. It was short on the debit side. Therefore, the suspense would be debited. A suspense account was opened and the difference of $168 was entered on the debit side. See what I said before. On the 31st of May 2010, few months later, the error was found. We had made a payment of $168 to K-Leak. It was correctly entered in the cash book, but was not entered in K-Leak's account. So remember when we mentioned the errors and we said that there are times when you enter in one account but do not enter in the other. So you have a credit entry but no debit entry, or you have a debit entry and no credit entry. So let's look at how we would have treated that in the journal. So because we made a payment to K-Leak, it is going to be debited in his account. So we're going to debit K-Leak and then we're going to credit the suspense account to show that this correction is being done. So payment to K-Leak was omitted from the accounts. So in the suspense account, as we stated before, we would have opened the suspense with the $168. And then once we credit it with K-Leak, we would have balanced it off or double underlined to show that we're closing it off because the suspense is no longer needed as we're going to update the trial balance. And then K-Leak will actually have the entry on the debit side. Now, when there are more than one entry, that's a lot more than just what we did previously. So the trial balance at the 31st of December 2007 showed a difference of $77. Being a shortage on the debit side. So let's think about it. If it was short on the debit side, which side would you put it on in the suspense account? Right, the debit side. On the 28th of February 2008, all errors were found. So we found the errors a few months later. A check of $150 paid to Elken had been correctly entered in the cash book but had not been entered into Ken's account. The purchase account had been undercast by $20. A check of $93 received from K-San had been correctly entered in the cash book but has not been entered in San's account. So let's look at the journal entry. So for the first one, where we made a payment to Ken, because we made a payment to Ken and Ken is a creditor, we would have definitely debited his account in the first place. We didn't do that, so we're going to go ahead and debit his account in the purchase ledger with the $150. And seeing that it is the only account that was missing, we would definitely put the other entry into the suspense account on the credit side in the general ledger. Check paid omitted from Elken's account. For the second one, purchase was undercast, meaning that the purchase was short by $20. Purchases carry a debit balance, so we're going to go ahead and debit purchases with the $20 and credit the suspense account with the $20 and have purchases undercast by $20. By putting the $20, we will increase purchases to the right figure. And then the third one, we're going to debit suspense and credit K-Sans. Now, why are we debiting suspense? K-Sans gave us a check, therefore it's a debtor who is paying us. So we would have credited the debtor's account to show that entry. So that's what we did. And we must have a debit for a credit. So we will debit the suspense account. Check received omitted from K-Sans account. And I'll show you the ledgers at this point. So you have the suspense account. We had the debit suspense account with the $77. We had the correction being made in K-Kens by debiting it and crediting the suspense. So you see that we did that. And then purchases was undercast with the $20. So we debit it with the $20. And then we're going to credit suspense with that amount as we stated in the journal. K-Sans, we credit it to show that we received payment, and then we debit the suspense account with that amount. At the end of the day, both sides, or debit and our credit side, will amount to the same. So we go ahead and double underline, and we're finished with the suspense account, and the trial balance will be revised. Let's look at another example. So these are more errors that were found while going through the books. Now, if you look at it, the first one says sale had been undercast by $200. So the sales account was short by $200. Sales carry a credit balance. So we're definitely going to credit the sales account with the $200 and debit suspense to show the correction. Sales undercast by $200. Number 2, sales of $610 to T West had been debited in error to T Wesley account. Now, based on what we're seeing, this is not an undercast. This is not where we miscalculate or we enter debit in one account and do not have the credit, or have the credit and don't have the debit, or we have a greater amount on the debit side and less amount on the credit. This is where we put it in the wrong person's account. So this transaction or error would not have affected the trial balance agreement. So this would be error of commission. So we're going to correct this error. So we will not be having any suspense here, but we will debit T West because he's a debtor and the sales was made to him and it was accidentally placed in Wesley's account. So debit T West and credit Wesley account with the amount, and write our narrative or narration, correction of error of commission, sales to T West had been debited in error to T Wesley. Now the third one, rent account had been undercast. So rent was short by $90. Rent carries a debit balance. So to increase it to the correct amount, we are going to definitely debit it, enter the amount, and credit suspense. It says undercast, so another account was not affected. So that's why we have our suspense. 90, rent undercast by 90. Number 4, discount allowed had been overcast by 100. No other account affected, just one, and so we are going to correct this. Discount allowed normally carries a debit balance, but if it's overcast, it means that it is greater than it ought to be. So if it carries a debit balance and you need to correct it by reducing it, you would put the entry on the opposite side, that's the credit side, to lower the amount. So that's why we debit suspense and credit discount allowed with the amount, both in the general ledger, and the narration is discount allowed overcast by 100. The fifth one, the sale of a computer has been credited in error to the sales account. Now, 2 accounts affected, computer and sales. So automatically you should know that this is not going to be an account that would be entered in the suspense account. All right, so we know that computer is an asset, sales is not. So there's a different type of an account that it was entered in. So that's error of principle. So we're going to debit sales and credit computer because we sell the computer. So we'd have initially credited computer account, and then because we made that mistake, we're going to debit sales to remove it from that account and put it in the correct amount. Correction of error of principle, sale of computer incorrectly entered in the sales account. Let's move on and look at our ledgers. So we will have our suspense account. This figure, the balance brought forward is given. So we have it on the credit side. The first one with sale being undercast, we went ahead and we ensure that it is added up. So we put it on the credit side, put the sales on the debit side for the suspense. For Wesley, it had nothing to do with suspense, so we're going to just have our two accounts, that's West and Wesley. So we're going to be debiting West as mentioned before and credit Wesley with the amount. Then for the rent being under cost, we're going to increase it by placing the entry on the debit side and then correct it in the suspense on the credit. Discount allowed over cost, again, it normally carries a debit balance, but because it's over, we're going to put it on the credit side, and then the matching entry would be on the debit side of our suspense account. And the last one would be computer and sale. Now, the computer was sold and we accidentally put it in sales, so we're going to have to remove it from sales from the credit side by debiting it and put it into the computer account by crediting it. Now we will be looking at the effects of the errors on profit. Some errors will have meant that the original profit calculated will be wrong. Other errors will have no effect on profit. So if we should reflect on what we have covered so far, you would have recognized that the suspense account was created when the trial balance did not agree, and so we open the suspense account, make sure that it agrees. Then we would have moved forward and did our calculations for our income statement to get our profit and our balance sheet. So these errors, when we find them, they could have affected the calculated figure that we have for our original profit. So let us look at it in depth. So we're going to first look at errors which do not affect the profit calculation. So the net profit would not be affected, or gross profit would not have been affected by these errors. If any error affects items only on the balance sheet, so if the error only affects assets, liability, and capital, then the original calculated profit will not need to be changed. So you don't have to make any adjustment to the profit figure, because these items would not have affected, or these errors would not have affected anything that would be used to calculate the profit. So here's an example. So assume $80 in the trial balance was short on the debit side on the 31st of December 2007. On the 1st of November 2008, that is almost a year later, the error was found. We paid $80 to a creditor, T-Monk, by check. It was correctly entered in the cash book but not entered to T-Monk. T-Monk is a creditor, and creditors will not be found on the income statement, so that would not have affected the net profit figure or the gross profit figure. It would be, this information would be on the balance sheet. So let's go and look. So we would have debited T-Monk and credit the suspense account. But please note that both of these accounts appear on the balance sheet, with T-Monk being the creditor and bank. Then the net profit would not change, just as I had mentioned before, and you would have had the ledger information to show that. We will look at errors which do affect profit calculation. If the error is in one of the figures shown in the income statement or the trading profit and loss, such as your sales, purchases, your expenses, and your revenues, then the original profit will need to be amended. It will need to be adjusted. So here's an example. Assume the $80 debit balance was because of rent account was added up incorrectly. Now rent is an expense that would definitely go on your income statement. It should be shown as $8,440 instead of $8,400. So it was undercast. The error was identified on the 1st of June 2006. Note the original net profit is $52,030. So let us look at what would have been done in the rent account. We would have debited it. Rent is an expense, carries a debit balance, so it was short undercast or understated, and so we would have to put it on the debit side to increase the amount from the 8,400 to the 8,480, and we would have credited the suspense account because no other account was affected. So rent was undercast by $80. And this would have been our entry. We would have closed off suspense, seeing that we found the error. So let us look at the statement of corrected net profit for the year ended 31st of December 2006. You would recognize that we started out with the original net profit of $52,030, and then we less the rent undercast. Why did we less it? We less it because normally rent, being an expense, would be minused from our gross profit, and this amount was short. So the amount of 8,400 was what we minused from our gross profit, and so this would have been short. So we'd have to less the $80 that was short by to get the new corrected net profit for the year. So here's a table that summarizes the change in profit. So if we're dealing with an expense and it was overcast, more than it should have been, then we would have less it from our gross profit, which would have reduced our net profit. So the profit would have been less, decreased. And so in order to fix it, we would have add back the amount that was overcast to the original net profit. If the expense was undercast, it means that the total expense would have been short or less than it should have been, so our profit would have been more. So in order to fix that, we would less it. Purchases, if purchases was overstated, it means that more would be placed in the cost of goods sold, and when minus from sales, that would have caused our profit to be less than it should have been. So we're going to add back the amount that it's overstated by. If purchases is understated, it means that cost of goods sold would have been less than it should have been, and so gross profit would have definitely been a little bit more. So in so fixing it, we would have to less what it is undercast by. Sales, if overcast, will cause us to have a greater amount of profit, so we're going to less the amount it was overcast by. If sales was undercast, it means that we would have a small amount of gross profit, net profit, so it will be decreased, so we're going to add back the amount it was undercast by. And revenue, similar to sales, if overcast, causes our profit to increase because we add it to gross profit, so we're going to less it. And if revenue is undercast, meaning that we would not have put enough in or add enough to our gross profit, then the gross profit would be, or the profit after we have added would be less, so we're going to add it. So if you recognize, expenses and purchases once overstated will cause your profit to be lower, decrease, so you add. Expense and purchases, if understated, it will make it seem like you have more profit, so you're going to have to less it. While sales and revenue, if overcast, you're going to have a greater profit, so you're going to have to less it by what it was overcast by. And sales and revenue, if it's undercast, it causes your profit to be less than it should have been, so you're going to add back what it was undercast by. I hope you understand. So here's an example where there's more than one errors, and we're going to look at how it affected our net profit. So sales is overcast by $90, so we're going to have to reduce sales. So we debit sales with the $90, credit suspense, sales overcast by 90. Insurance undercast, so insurance is less than it should have been, so we're going to debit it, being an expense account which carry a debit balance. We're going to debit it with the $40 and credit suspense with the $40. The narration insurance undercast by $40. The next one, cash received $50 from a debtor. Now we only put it in the cash book. We did not put it in Sylvia's account. So because we received from the debtor, it would be decreasing their account, which normally is credited to show the decrease. So we're going to credit Sylvia with the $50 and debit the suspense account. Cash received omitted from Sylvia's account. And then the last one, a purchase of $59 is entered in the books. Debit and credit entry 95. Now, the fact that they tell you that it is two entry that is incorrect at this point, you know that this will not be entered in the suspense account. So both the purchase account and the creditor's account is affected. And you see that it's 59 when we enter 95. So there's a swap in the sequence. So we know that this is transposition error. So we're going to debit the creditor's account to show that we're removing the excess $36 and then credit purchases account with the $36 to reduce it. So correction of transposition error, purchase of goods from creditor entered as $95 instead of $59. So let's move on and see how we will actually fix this in the suspense account and other accounts. Only the first three would have affected suspense, as you could see, because overcast, undercast, and only one entry was made. So the additions were over here and under here and one entry. So we're going to put in that information. So sales being overcast, we debited it. So we have that entry. Insurance being undercast, we debited. Put that entry in the suspense. Sylvia's account was not entered in. We did not show that. So we credited to show a reduction in Sylvia's balance. And then we debit the suspense account. Adding up both sides of the suspense account results in it being balanced. So we double underline and we're through. And then as we mentioned, the last one was transposition. So two accounts is affected, and that's the purchases being credited and the creditor's account being debited. So let us see exactly how to treat our statement of correction of net profit for the year ended 31st of December 2006. So we have first our net profit as per financial year, and we have the amount 5230. Now purchases was overcast, so it would have cost our profit to be less than it should have been. So we're gonna add it back. Remember our rules? When purchase is overcast, we add. So we get our new figure. Then sales was overcast, making your profit greater than it should have been. So you're going to less. Insurance was undercast, which also made your profit seemingly higher because you minus less insurance. So to make sure that's the correct amount, you less the amount it was undercast by. So 90 and 40 equaling to 130. Then you minus that from the $52,066 and you will get the corrected net profit for the year. So I hope you realize what happened and we stick to the rule. The purchases overstating, it would have cost of goods sold to be too high, and when you minus it from sales, your gross profit would be less than it should have been. So that's why we add it back. Your sales, when you minus your cost of goods sold, will give you a higher gross profit because it was overstated. And then your insurance, you would normally less it from your gross profit or the profit after you add your revenue, and so your net profit would be greater than it ought to be. So by fixing the undercast, you would less it from it, and that would be your new corrected net profit. Okay, so it's now time to summarize. So we will know that our suspense account is created once the trial balance does not agree. So once the debit side is different from the credit side, then we're going to create the suspense account. However, if the trial balance agrees, then we would know that if it has errors, it would be one of the 7 errors that were mentioned in our previous video. So the same side that the entry was made on to let the trial balance agree is the same side it is entered on in the suspense account. So if the credit side was short and you add the amount or the difference on that credit side, then you would put it on the credit side in the suspense account. If it was placed on the debit side because the debit side was short, then you're going to put it on the debit side in the suspense account. So as we stated before, the errors will have to be found and corrected. So once you open your suspense account throughout the next year, you're going to have to make time to find those errors and correct them. Now, once the errors are found and they do affect the trial balance agreement, it will be entered in the account with the error, or the account that has the error, and the suspense account. So one will be debited and the other will be credited. When all errors are corrected, the suspense account is closed. So once you've found all of the errors and you make your corrections, then you're going to definitely close your suspense account, because there's no more need for that suspense account, because a revised trial balance will be prepared. Now, when it comes on to the errors affecting your profit, if the error affects or errors affects the accounts or account that will only appear on the balance sheet, then it will not affect the profit. So as we said, if it has to do with any assets, liability, or capital that would not have appeared on your income statement or your trading profit and loss, then you won't have to worry about it affecting the net profit or the gross profit. If it is found in the accounts that will be on the income statements, like your sales and your purchases and your expense and your revenues, those will definitely affect your profit figure, so we would have to make adjustments to it. Once those errors would have caused your original profit to decrease, you would add back to the original profit. So if the error would have caused your gross profit or net profit figure to be less than what it ought to have been, you would add back to that original figure to increase it to where it ought to be. And then if it had caused the net profit or gross profit to be too high or higher than it ought to have been increased, then you're going to less it from that original profit figure. And you will find that in your statement of corrected net profit. So we have come to the end of today. So I'll bid you farewell and see you next time. All the best.